Now I am launching the YouTube Live. All right. Hi, and welcome in the next webinar in our Plantae webinar series. My name is Jason Padilla, and I am your technical host for today's webinar. Next slide. This webinar series is brought to you today by Plantae, the open online community for plant scientists powered by the American Society of Plant Biologists. I would like to give a special thank you to all our ASPB members who are attending today. Your ASPB member dues help support make this webinar possible. For any of you who have not yet joined ASPB, you can join today using the discount code presents10 to receive 10% discount on registration. ASPB members get early access to this webinar, learn more about ASPB and all the opportunities we provide at aspb.org. Next slide. In addition, please be sure to check out our YouTube channel where you can find many of our exciting talks. As I mentioned, this webinar is recorded and you will be able to watch this for your friends later on and share it with any of your folks in your network who might be interested and would benefit from the content that our awesome speakers will be sharing today. Next slide. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items to make sure that you get the most out of attending today's webinar. If you are experiencing technical issues, please let us know about those using the chat box, or you can email me at jpadilla@aspb.org. If you have questions for our guest speakers, please add them to the Zoom Q&A section that you see on your screen. Our moderators will be sharing them with our speakers during the Q&A portion of each of the webinars, each of the presentations. If you have trouble connecting or need to leave early, as I mentioned, this webinar is recorded and you will be able to watch this on our YouTube channel. So if you're not already, be sure to follow the Plantae YouTube channel to receive notifications when new content is posted. All right. Now I'm going to turn it over to our moderators who will facilitate today's session. So take it away, everyone. I'm starting with Maria Juliana.
So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Our webinar will present finding ways to enhance the science public perception. And we have 3 speakers, and after each talk, we have a Q&A section, and afterwards, our concluding remarks. We have speakers talking about science communication, scientific projects to shorten the distance to society, and also citizen science projects. I think we can go to the next slide. Okay. So I'm Maria Juliana, or Maju. I'm a biologist and also a PhD in genetics and plant breeding, and I work with molecular biology and plant growth and defense at Brazil and Germany. So we can go to our speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Craig Cormick. Dr. Craig Cormick is an award-winning science communicator. For many years, he worked in government agencies, including the Zero, overseeing public engagement and education programs, particularly in biotechnology and nanotechnology. He specializes in drivers of public perceptions to new technologies, and his research has been widely published in journals, including those of Nature and Cell. He's former president of the Australian Science Communicators, currently advises the Organizations for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons on its advisory board on education and outreach. And he's the author of the book, The Science of Communicating Science. Craig has a Bachelor of Arts and a PhD in Creative Communication. Find him at www.thinkoutside.com.au. Craig, you may start.
Thank you very much. I'll just jump in quickly to share my screen with everyone. we go. So good morning, good afternoon, middle of the day, and whichever day you are on the Monday or Tuesday. So I'm going to talk about the science of public perception, because there's a lot of research that's gone into understanding how the public forms public perceptions. There's a science all to it in its own. So I'm going to briefly look at what we know about that in terms of engaging the public on plant biotechnology. First one, the big challenge for us is what's happened in the last 5 to 6 years. We're now what they call the post-truth, post-trust, post-expert, post-COVID-19 world, where things that used to work really well don't work so well anymore because the way the world has changed. And here are some of the things, the challenges we have to work with in science communication. We have a big lack of trust in public institutions. Anti-globalization and anti-multinationalization on the rise, increased empowerment of consumers. We have celebrities as opinion leaders being held up as the source of all information and knowledge. We've had a lot of public health scares. We have environmental disasters. We have a big rise in alternative beliefs and alternative truths. We have a lot of government failures. The internet echo has become an echo chamber and the main form of media for many people. The rise of dogma, increased demand for scrutiny and consultation of government and industry, and a lot of new citizen-driven democracy, which can sometimes work against itself. So the problem, we've become more fractured socially and ideologically. And whatever beliefs we choose to adopt, we can and will find like-minded people to affirm those beliefs. So there's no longer a scale of authority of data and scientific data near the top. Is now whoever agrees with your opinion, no matter how fringe, that's the scale of authority we're now working with. So effective science communication no longer starts with the scientific information we know. It now starts with whatever the people we want to communicate with know or believe, no matter how illogical or unscientific to our minds. That now has to be the starting point for science communications. And there can be a big divide between how attitudes are formed. Traditionally, science-based attitudes are driven by fact. But we find now in the public, a lot of attitudes are driven by emotion, and fact-based beliefs and emotion-based beliefs can be quite at odds with each other. So I'm going to give you 5 important things to know. And if you forget everything I've said today, okay, but remember these 5 things, because these are vital to understanding how to communicate in this post-trust, post-truth, post-expert, post-COVID world. When information is complex, people make decisions based on their existing values and their beliefs. People then seek affirmation of those attitudes or beliefs, no matter how fringe, and will reject any information or facts that are counter to their attitudes or beliefs. And if you want to test that out, just go and talk to someone who's an anti-COVID vaccination or a COVID denier and just see how well the facts stand up against their beliefs. Very important one. Attitudes that were not formed by logic are not influenced by logical arguments. Public concerns about contentious science or technologies are almost never about the science itself. And scientific information, therefore, does little to influence those concerns. And in the space of plant biology, it can be driven by, who owns the technology. Are multinationals involved rather than public sector involved? Is big pharma tied into it? So they're the issues people are actually driven by their concerns. And so explaining the science doesn't actually address those concerns. And people most trust those people who they see as values mirroring their own. And when you understand people's values, it gives you a whole new path to communicate with people. And understanding values, I'll give you a small case study here to explain it. So if you have pro-development values, it can lead you to say, respect the science on GM foods, but the science on climate change, that's dubious. However, if you have pro-environmental values, that can lead you to say, respect the science on climate change, but the science on GM foods is dubious. Now, in both cases, the science hasn't changed. but the framing of the person's values has changed how they perceive it. So we know a lot about attitudes to GM foods and crops, and it's a very good case study to look at how people's attitudes are formed and what we can do about the different ways people think. People are not either for or against GM crops. That's a simple question. They're either a lot against, a little bit against, in the middle, a little bit for, completely for. So in Australia, we've been surveying them across a 10-fold scale. And to the left of your screen, 11% are completely against it. Up to the right of your screen, 12% completely for it. And the bulk of the public are there in the middle. And they'll move around a bit depending on what's in the media and what's happening with, new scares or new technologies. So we call these people on the end the polar bears, because they're polar opposites. And they're the ones who dominate the media debate and dominate politics, but they don't represent the middle group. The middle group we call the penguins, and the penguins scuttle back and forward depending on where things are. So one of the first things I tell people in public attitude communication is, don't mistake a penguin for a polar bear. But the polar bears are noisy. They take up all the space, they dominate, and it's very easy to think you're talking to the public when actually you're talking to a polar bear. Don't mistake polar bears for penguins. So one of the big challenges in science communication is not allowing those polar bears to fight it out. The people on the extreme sides, they're never going to change their opinion and they want to dominate the debate. So how to avoid engaging with polar bears. We also can then break attitudes down into 4 key categories. And this works across almost all technologies. You've got the disbelievers who think it's never safe. You've got the worried group. They say, are you in support of this technology? No. However, if it was proven safe, I might change my mind. Then you've got the cautious yes. Are you in support? Yes, but only if regulated. Then you've got the believers. Yep, I'm happy with this technology, safe way to produce food. Now, this graph will vary a little bit across different technologies. We put up here a contentious technology like GM foods. We can look at it nanotechnology, we look at it gene editing, and the graph and the proportions will vary a bit, but basically you'll still get those same 4 segments of the population. So you've got first, those who strongly support your technology, in this case, gene technology. Now, one of the challenges with science communication is we spend too much time talking to this group because they come along to our public forums and they subscribe to our newsletters, but they get it already. There's a group you actually don't need to waste too much time talking to. The next group, those who support it and say yes, but they're a very important group to reach. The first one, those who oppose it but say no, however, they're also a very important group to reach. And those who strongly oppose it, they also are a group we often spend a lot of time engaging with because we're seeing them as the oppositional groups we need to engage with. But they're not the actual important public because they almost never change their mind. So yes, you need to engage with numbers 1 and 4, but you don't need to over-engage with them and use all your energy in those spaces. So let's have a quick look at these 2 groups in the middle, the vital groups of the public. Those who say yes, but, that but defines what information they are most interested in. They're actually telling you what they want to hear. If it is yes, but I worry about the long-term effects, then that's the information they will dodge all other information you give them, and that's the information that will influence their opinion and attitude. Those who oppose it would say no, however, that however defines what information they are interested in. If they say no, however, if it was proven to be safe by someone I trust, then that's the information. They will dodge all other information to find, and that is the information that will most influence them. So, as I said before, the conversations you need to have less with the top 2 and more with this group down the middle. They're a bit harder to reach, but that's where you actually have impact. And the joy of this is they actually tell you. They will tell you what they want to know. So in public attitude surveys, for instance, in Australia, we know that 38% of the yes, but say health effects. You've got to show me it's safe to consume. Is there proper independent of products? 25%. Yes, if the process is ethical and sustainable. and then it tracks down. So we actually know the types of messages these people want. And for the no howevers, they want to see proof that it's safe to consumers. They want to see long-term consequence of testing to ensure it's safe. And they want to see transparency of the testing process, and then more smaller things. So these are the conversations that need to be had with the worried and the cautious. They want to know the clear benefits. They want to know it's proven safe. They want transparency of processes. They want to know there's unbiased information. There's no evidence of environmental harm, that's sustainable, and that it's ethical. And we know this because these groups have told us what the information is they want to give them. And yet time and time again, when I'm working with plant biotechnologists or scientists and technologists, they say, no, I want to explain the science to them. We say, no, these groups don't want to hear the science. These are the things they need to know. If we start the communication from their point of view, what they're most interested in hearing, very different from what we are most interested in telling them. So look before at the fact and emotion difference, emotion versus logic, what's playing out in the public space there. How do we move that? We need to use what I call, we need to tap into emotional intelligence. That's a mix of fact and emotion. We need to understand what emotions are driving people, and we need to use the science of understanding that to be able to communicate with them. So find what people want to know rather than what you want them to know, is my takeaway message for everybody. And if anybody's interested in following up, I have a book on this that's collected all the reams of social data on communication and boiled it down into a plain speak book called The Science of Communicating Science, which is a very easy read. But it takes hundreds of academic pages, things, and boils them down into plain English. And thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Karmick, for your very enlightening talk. I think that for us that are scientists, we don't know the skills to communicate effectively. And we have some questions. Actually, I was wondering, because you talked about this this opposition between values and logic, right? Emotions and logic. But what about like basic science? When we are working with basic science in the laboratory that people cannot relate easily, what would be how to communicate effectively with people?
Yeah, so people are interested in the science once you've gotten their level of trust. And so you can't start with science. You've got to start with trust and getting people to understand you care about what they think about. So there's a very famous saying in risk communication, which says, people don't care what you know. They want to know that you care. And so people will hand over to you the capacity for you to tell them about the science once you've demonstrated you understand their values, you understand their beliefs, you understand from their point of view. They will then ask you to explain science. It's like there's this big barrier in front of you. And once you've talked to them and said, I understand where you're coming from, we want to talk about the ethics, we want to talk about control, we want to talk about all these things, then they'll ask you to explain the science. But if you explain the science first, you're on the other side of this big wall. And it doesn't reach people. Oh, we'll reach segment A, the people who are highly supportive of it, but it won't reach the other segments very well. And that's one of the challenges with science communication. You've got to stop talking to the converted, stop talking to those people who already get it, and start talking to the wider publics who need different tools and different methods of communication.
Yeah, thank you. We have one question from the Q&A section. So as you're saying, we have to have different strategies for different audiences. Like we have to communicate in a different way if you want to reach different targets, right?
Yes.
And how does age affect whether people are polar bears and penguins? I mean, you mentioned this, and is there any correlation between age or different
there's a minor
characteristics.
there's a minor correlation between age and gender when it comes to certain technologies, different technologies. And plant biotechnologies, for instance, we know that in general in society, the older you get, the more conservative you get. That's a general trend. And we know women of childbearing age are very worried about anything that could have an impact on children. That's a real trigger for them. So those things sometimes need to be addressed to an audience if that's their concern. Find out that's concern, address them. In general, age is not as important as other values, such as, you know, do I trust technologies? Do I believe science is working for the benefit of humanity, or do I believe science is somehow controlled by crazy scientists working in secret institutions? They're more significant. Age does have a minor influence in terms of conservatism, but otherwise, no, it's the actual values and beliefs that are a bigger influence.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Karmic, for this very nice talk. Now we're going to move to our next speaker, and Dennis will introduce.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, and I hope all of you can hear me. My name is Dennis Bafuiwa. I'm from Ghana, and I'm a science communicator. And today on this webinar, I will be introducing our next speaker in the person of Maria Claudia Segovia Salcedo. And she's currently an associate professor at the Universidad de las Fuerzas Armadas, and she is also a coordinator and co-founder of the Ecuadorian Network of Women in Science. Now, she was born in Ecuador and has an MSc in Environmental and Plant Biology at Ohio University and graduated from the University of Florida, where she had a PhD in biology and also has a graduate certificate in tropical conservation and development. Now, she works in plant conservation at the Andean High Altitude Ecosystems, and at University of Florida, she was an active member of WISE, UF, and a co-founder of the University of Florida PhD Moms, and organized workshops on professional women in environmental science and sustainability. So I'll leave this up to her, our next session up to her to do the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening to all of you. For me, it's a pleasure to be with you today and share a little bit about my perspective of science communication from Ecuador that probably is completely different from the other two speakers today. I would like to share with you guys my journey to science communication. And I think that basically what I want to talk to you is about a little bit about my story, the story of the network, what are the achievements that we have been getting today, and also some learning points that I want to share with you. As you know, I am from Ecuador, and probably why communication for me is important. When I was trying to put together this presentation, I was thinking about my family. My dad is a communicator based on education, and also my mom is a social worker in education. Then even though that I am a study biologist, obviously education and communication always were in the background on all of my life. And also another important point is that I had the opportunity to move outside of my country and study abroad. And I get a really cool mentors that really show me the importance of science communication. And I think that is important. And the science communication, obviously outside of the academic bubble, that is important. And as you said before in my presentation, for me, it was definitely a breaking point, the creation of PhD Moms, that basically was a club in University of Florida that helped us to understand how we help each other get our degree, because as you know, as a moms and a student, sometimes it's not so easy. But I would like to talk to you about a little bit about the situation in Ecuador. When I come back to Ecuador after my PhD, I realized that there was a lot of things that haven't changed so much. As you can see in the picture, you have a picture of the early of the 19th century, where you can see only one woman. And even though that the things haven't changed, we are still having low levels of women in STEM careers or pure science careers. This data that you can see is from a few years ago. And also in Ecuador, we have really few researchers per 1,000 people in this case. And also we have different data about the gender equality that obviously is not so good in Ecuador. We have a lot to work on, and also we have a really hard problem of gender violence if we compare with other countries in South America. In this is the context for women in general in Ecuador, but what happened with the scientific culture? What happened with people and science? And as you can see in these two charts, Ecuador is they have low trust in science in general. And it's the same if we see how they trust in scientists, we have also a low percentage compared to other countries. And that is the reality that we live on. In this context, in 2016, 20 women decide to create this network, that is the Ecuadorian Network of Women Science. That it was an organization to start talking about women in science and technology in academy. And we have basically three main goals. The visibilization of Ecuadorian women in science, to promote women in science, to increase women participation in academia and decision-making, and also improve research funding access through sharing this information, and also motivate scientific exchange data related with women in science. We have a national coordination that is made for 8 women, and also we have an ethics committee, and so far we have 25 nodes in different universities in Ecuador. More or less, we are more than 400 associates from Ecuadorian universities, and as you can see, we are from different areas of science. The majority are from the social science. Now, probably many of you are asking, what about science communication? We are trying to start promoting and do the visibilization of women in science, and we realized that we start becoming science communicator of women in science in Ecuador. We are using the social network, and so far we are in 3 social networks: Facebook, X, and Instagram. And we start getting a lot of followers, and we start learning how to communicate in the social network. Because obviously the message is different if we are working in Facebook, or we are working in X, or in Instagram. And we are learning, is a learning process, but we are sharing science for Ecuadorian women by Ecuadorian women. After that, we are getting network projects, generating data about Ecuadorian women in science, increasing the number of women in position of decision-making inside of academy in Ecuador. And also we are organizing local and international events of women in science, and obviously visibility and outreach of women in science in Ecuador. And this is another way to communicate science that we found out that is working for us here in Ecuador. We are creating spaces for international workshops where we talk about women in science, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges. We are publishing some memories and books related with that. Also, we create different workshops and activities with different entities, as for example, the Science Museum in the capital, and we get information, we get a lot of kids, schools, and we create some representations of women in science, and we create different events around all of the Ecuador for the Day of Women in Science and Technology, that is February 11 of each year. I'm sorry, I think that I moved backward. Sorry about that. And also we got another interesting perspective of how we share our science, and we create an exhibition of women in science that is a mobile exhibition that is moving from one place to another. Right now, we are having more than 20,000 visitors to this exhibition. Different universities moving the exhibition with the women in science in Ecuador. And each one of these panels, as you can see, they have this short information about the women in science, what they are doing. And also they have, in some cases, a QR information that they can get, a QR code, when they can get the rest of information about the science and paper and science information about each one of these women in science. Also, 2 years ago, we started another way also to enhance the public with science. In this case, we create a Women in Science calendar. This is the third year that we are doing. Each one of the months, we have one scientist when we share what is the main purpose. We have been very successful in that. There is a lot of schools and high schools that they are interested to know more about the women in science in Ecuador. What we have learned so far, obviously most of us associates are academic, women in academics, but also we are learning and teaching them how to communicate science. We understand the communication is the key among the associates, but also outside of the network. We have different partnerships because we cannot get all of that we have been done so far with alone. We need another organizations and the Museum of Science and also international organizations that they help us to open our public. And also our voice as a network is make us stronger at local and national level and science level. But in this process, I realized that also I can communicate science to the public, and I got a voice. And also I realized that I can use also the social networks to share science, not only my science, but also the science of other women. At the same time, also I can inspire other young scientists as a professor, as a mentor, as a science communicator. And also I can create a space to communicate science, make workshops, seminars like these ones, also participates in projects with citizen science and participatory science in my projects that I am leading on. And also with the network, we start to doing some research related about the science communication in Ecuador. And we create a small survey after the COVID to see how the people in Ecuador are getting science information. And what we found out that most of the people are getting information from webinars, from digital news, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. And as you can see, the social networking is really important, at least in COVID pandemic, for sharing these data. That is the reason why the scientist also has to be part of the social network. And also we ask how they want to share or how they want to receive that information. And most of them as a video and infographics, webinars, like photos, podcasts, and that is interesting because sometimes as academic, you don't get that information usually in the academic perspective. And I think all of us, we have to start learning how we get to the public. Finally, I would like to say that the science communication definitely promotes a society with more freedom and critical thinking. Public engagement with science should be one of our objectives as researchers, to get to the people. Also, if we communicate correctly science, also we can improve research funding. That in countries as Ecuador, there are few funds. Also increase scientific vocations, because definitely we need more scientists in our countries. And also, as I said before, science communication is a continuous learning process, because we have to learn the audience, the public, what is the right way to communicate, what is the message that we want to communicate, and definitely what is the audience that we want to share. And if you have any question and you want to share us, here we have all of social network. If we can to follow us, basically is the network that we are sharing information about the science of Ecuadorian women. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria. I know that the audiences will put their questions in the Q&A, but then briefly, let me ask you, what are some of the challenges you faced trying to rope women into science in Ecuador?
One of the challenges, at least that what we are getting, is that as Greg said before, we have the two polar bears very clear here in Ecuador. Then if you start trying to get science, you immediately get these two polar bears against you. And that is what we have learned immediately. The moment that you start saying one thing about science, and especially if you are a woman, you get more attacks, especially in social network. If you get the touch of one of these polar bears, that there are the two poles of information that we get here. And probably one of the things is that how to deal with that. At least for me, it had been a little tough, how to deal with the attacks, especially in social networks. So far, I am good, but at the beginning, it was like overwhelming when you get only a data or a fact about a specific science topic.
I think we lost Dennis today, but we have already also another question. From your position as women scientist, how can you motivate more girls to pursue STEM careers in developing countries? What will be good strategies to communicate that women can do science?
For us, it's very important on one thing that we are completely sure is that you cannot be anything that you don't see. That is for us the reason that we want that see us, that the little girls and the young women see that you can see biology, you can be geologists, you can be astronauts. And I think that that is important, and that is one of the main points. And also that is the reason why we try to visit the schools, high schools, and also we are trying to work with the Ministry of Education here in Ecuador to get some of the information of scientists in the school curricula. And also, if they invite us, we are open to do it. That is the idea. And probably we cannot see the result right now. Probably we are going to see in the next years. But I am very hopeful that we are improving the numbers.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I got off a bit. I do not know if anybody has asked a question of what you're doing to bring more girls into STEM, so that then these young girls can have the idea, already, and they're already established, so that the work will be easier.
Yeah, I already asked them, and also we are talking with the government, the Ecuadorian government, to see if they are, for example, a specific fellowship for women, and also change a little bit some laws related about the hierarchy in academy here in Ecuador, to take in account some of the challenge of women in science.
All right.
Let's see in the next years.
Thank you very much. All right, so over to you, Andre.
All right. Okay. So
yeah, so Andre will be introducing the next speaker.
Thank you, Dennis. Yes, my name is Andres. I am from Ecuador, and now I'm a first-year PhD student at the University of Florida. I'm working with functional food and molecular biology and genetics, and also I work in Revista Digital Catalysis, which is the first science magazine in Ecuador. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to our next speaker, Erin Posthumes. She coordinates local, regional, and national data collection projects for the USA National Phenology Network. The USA NPN is a national scale monitoring and research initiative based on the at the University of Arizona, focused on collecting, organizing, and delivering phenological data, information, and forecasts to support natural resources management and decision-making, to advance the scientific field of phenology, and to promote understanding of phenology by a wide range of audiences. Erin has a bachelor in environmental biology from the University of Colorado at Boulder, and a master's in wildlife conservation and management from the University of Arizona, and has worked from the USA NPN since 2010. So the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. So today I want to share a number of ways that we at the USA National Phenology Network have tried to really engage the public in doing science to try to improve people's opinion about science. So we were established back in 2007. At the time, there was no really standardized way for people to collect information about seasonal cycles, also called phenology, in the country. So we had a few different goals for our network. Overall, we want to collect, store, and share phenology data. All of the data that are collected as part of our program are made freely available for anyone to use. We have a few different goals within that. We really want to work with people like natural resource managers to make sure that the information that is collected is useful to people that need to use it for decision making. So people who need to work on invasive species or conservation of other species, they have that information they need in the format that they need it. We also overall want to advance the science of phenology. We do a lot of communicating and connecting. I'll be talking about that today. And we really want to make sure that the information that we produce is useful and accessible to everyone in the country to create an equitable and inclusive network. So we set out to do this data collection, realizing that, trying to operate across the entire United States would be very difficult. So we really have leveraged the power of what people call citizen science or community science, people all across the country that are able to collect this information about seasonal cycles in their own backyards to contribute to this national effort. The roots of our program are based in what's called the Cloned Plants Project. This was an effort back in the 1950s to distribute cloned lilac plants. They were distributed all across the United States, and people collected information about the leafing and the bloom timing of these plants. It's something that once you have a little bit of training is really easy to observe. And it's really useful information when you have a geographic scale as big as the United States, hundreds of people all across the country. It's really useful to be able to have that large data set. And many studies have found that the data that are collected by the public are just as high quality as data coming from scientists. So as long as people have the right training, the right materials at their fingertips, they're able to collect that information that's very valuable. And particularly when they're following protocols that are based in science that allow people to collect this information in a standardized way. So this is an example of one of the protocols that we have as part of our Nature's Notebook program. This is a data sheet for one of our plants that's very common across the eastern part of the country called Eastern Redbud. And you can see that the questions that we have on the data sheet are pretty simple. We're asking yes or no questions to our participants. We also have a question mark on there because we found that if people are unsure, they still want to be able to circle something. So we offer that so they can mark something on the data sheet, even if they're not sure about the answer. So we ask these basic questions about leaves and flowers and fruits. Everyone's answering in the same way. And then we also have a secondary question about the degree to which that life cycle status is occurring. And you can see that reflected on this graph here on the right. So our participants are answering yes or no. This is denoted by the gray lines, meaning someone went out and looked and said, no, I don't see this occurring on my plant. And then the colored lines indicate, yes, I did see that, and then no again. So you can see that period of activity. And this allows us to capture the start of that life cycle stage that's occurring, and then the duration as well. And then these additional intensity questions allow us to capture not only the presence absence of that life cycle stage, but also the degree of the magnitude. So we can really capture peaks in activity, things like when was the most nectar available on a plant for pollinators, or when was the length of the leafing time for this plant that allows us to understand the amount of carbon that could be taken up by a particular tree. So we have over 1,700 different species that people are able to monitor on our list. This is a map that shows the data points that we have, the different data collection sites across the country. The circles denote kind of the density of records, places where we have a lot of data coming in. You can see that a lot of our large data collection sites are based near cities. We have a lot of people collecting data where people live, which makes sense. We do have a few other places where we have some of these larger circles. Those are sites that belong to the National Ecological Observatory Network, which is another organization that participates with us. But we've had tens of thousands of observers participate in this program, and we've accumulated 34 million records. I mentioned all of the data that we have are freely available. And as part of our transparency in the program, we really try to ensure that our participants are able to access that information and kind of view their data in the context of all the other data points that are being collected by other observers across the country. And we often encourage our observers to go onto this tool, look at their own data, compare the data to others near them, people that are collecting data on the same species, and really start to get a sense of how that fits into this larger picture. We offer seasonal stories. These are ways that kind of provide a tutorial into how to use the tool, that also allow people to manipulate the tool and try out different species or locations. And then we also have a tool that allows them, if they're already interested in a particular species, they can dive right in and start exploring that species to start to learn about what the people are finding on that plant or animal. There are two different ways that people can participate. I mentioned we have our backyard observers. These are people that participate either at their home or at a nearby location independently. But we also have what we call local phenology programs. And this has been more and more kind of what we're focused on at the USA NPN. And we really feel like this provides people a way to come together in a social way and observe plants and animals together as a group. So we encourage these groups to come up with their own objectives for doing data collection. We're trying to put science kind of in the hands of people that want to collect it for their own purposes. And so this graph here shows kind of the various reasons that people give us for wanting to start one of these programs. The top one is understanding climate change impacts. A lot of people, they have plants or animals that they care about, and they want to see with their own eyes what is happening with these plants and animals. So they set up a data collection site, they add those plant and animal species, and then they track them over time. Other people want to answer other types of science questions. Sometimes they're interested in, basically when does a plant have flowers on it at my location, or when am I going to see the birds or the butterflies that I care about? And then there's many, many other reasons as well. A lot of people are trying to engage students or engage the public. These are sometimes, national parks or visitor centers, nature centers that want to engage the people that come to their sites in doing data collection. And you can see these green dots represent the different local phenology programs we have across the country. We have over 500 that are participating with us. Another way that we engage people in science and in engaging with science in different ways is through what we call our data collection campaigns. So within that list of 1,700 species, we have a number of, I think 10 now, different data collection campaigns. These are groups of species, often different types of plants or animals that are of special interest to either researchers or natural resource managers. So we'll have scientists that approach us and say, I really want data on this suite of 10 species across the eastern part of the country. Can you leverage the power of the Nature's Notebook observers to help collect that data? And so we'll set up a data collection campaign. We advertise it to all of our participants. And so an example of one of these that we started, I think 2 years ago, is Quercus Quest. This is focused on oak species across the eastern part of the country. And we really like to provide a link between the researchers who are behind the campaign and the participants. So we offer a webinar at the beginning of the year where we have the researchers come and they give their perspective on why they need the data, and how useful the data are going to be, what they're planning on doing, the analyses, what they're hoping to learn. And the participants are there at the webinar and able to hear directly from the scientists about why their data are needed. They're able to ask questions that they have. And then we also do a series of newsletters where we can share out messages from the researchers. Also, we share back lots of results from our visualization tools back with the participants, so they're very clear on the different findings and how the data are being used. We also do other various forms of science communication because we are trying to communicate back with people about phenology, what scientists are finding. We do summarized versions of publications. So this is a couple different publications that have come out over the last year. We do very simple summaries, and I think the most important part is probably, what does this mean for you? We try to have a message in there about why people should care about the publication that came out. We really try to put this in simple language to avoid scientific jargon. We often will run this through an editor that will tell us the reading level. We try to keep it at high school reading level or below to make sure that it is really accessible to all of our participants. And then we also do regular webinars for our Nature's Notebook observers. This is where we do a bunch of different summaries of the phenology publications that have come out over the last year using the Nature's Notebook data. We have over 200 peer-reviewed publications at this point that use the data. So each year we try to do an update about the most recent ones. And then we also share back other ways, in addition to scientific publications, that data have been used by natural resource managers for decision-making, like that. I also wanted to share, because we've had a lot of communication with the media, just some of our experiences there. So one of the phenology products that we produce is called our spring leaf index. We have a spring leaf map and a spring bloom map. And basically what this does is it takes all those lilac observations that I mentioned earlier and puts it into a map that predicts when these plants are going to be leafing out and blooming in the spring. These plants are an indicator of early season activity. They're among the first plants to leaf out or bloom in the spring. And what's really neat is we've taken this map and made what's called an anomaly map. This is a way to compare this year to a long-term average. And so this map will actually show for location across the country, are you earlier or later than average? And this is a way to we can, relate this to activity of lawn pests or allergies or recreation like the Cherry Blossom Festival in Washington, D.C. And so it's become a really popular way for people to kind of understand, how is this year different than the long-term average? Am I going to see a really early year in terms of that seasonal activity or a later year? And so we've had just a ton of media interest. We've gained a lot of experience among our team in talking to various outlets. And we've learned that really, if you spend the time, giving the media what they need, you can really develop a relationship and establish that trust that can be really useful. And we often have a lot of the people that we've talked to in the last few years reach out to us just directly by email now and ask, hey, can you give me an update about what's going on this year? And because we already have that established, we can quickly pass them something because they always need something really fast. And they can get a story out there to kind of communicate our science. And just a couple other examples. It's not just spring activity, but often if there's a masting year, lots of oak acorns in a particular year, we'll get inquiries as well. And often these are people that we've talked to already in the past about our spring maps, and they're coming back to us because they trust us as kind of experts, the people that they know will get back to them quickly, and they can share that science back with the public. And then lastly, we do have a couple other ways where we've participated in different television programs, mostly through PBS, the public broadcasting company here in the US, just sharing other stories about ways that our data collectors have gotten engaged in science, some of our findings from the data collection across the country. And I just wanted to end on some of the impacts that we've seen. These are just a few of the quotes from some of our observers, but we've really found that, it's especially through these local phenology programs, they're able to really connect with students. They're involving people in doing the scientific method, collecting data. And it really makes a big impact on people's lives. They're able to see the science with their own eyes, take part in it. And so they really are able to, understand climate change impacts directly. And it really seems to have a huge impact on their lives. So I have a QR code here. If you're interested in following any of our newsletters and seeing some of the science communication we do, you can sign up there. And then I have my email on there as well, if anyone wants to reach out.
Thank you, Erin, for your presentation. Because of time, we are going to go for one question. How do you standardize the data collection from the public, and how do you train the community members? How long does this training take?
Yeah, we have standardized protocols that are developed by one of our staff members, but she has consulted with various experts on different taxa to develop those. We kind of developed them based on a functional group of plants, like live oak trees would get one protocol, and she would vet that with experts in that field and so on. The training, we do provide on the data sheet itself. There are a series of explanations for each question. So for something like breaking leaf buds, we give a very detailed definition of what that means. And so really the training can be right within the app or on the data sheet itself. We also offer an additional observer certification course. It's optional for participants, and that is about a 5-hour course that has a number of modules with it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your answer. So thank you very much to all the assistants, to everyone for the assistance. Just to remember you that all the Q&As will be made available after the webinar along with the recording.
All right. Yes. Thank you, everyone. Again, a special thank you to our event speakers. Thank you for sharing all the amazing insight. And thank you for all our attendees who took the time to tune in today. And so we hope that you'll join us in the next one. And as a reminder, this webinar will be made available and you can watch the recording after we had a chance to process this along with all the other information with the webinar. With that said, I hope you all have a great rest of your week and see you in the next one. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.